Hey, how's it going everyone? Greg here with RC Driver. Back in 2017, when I started working on this channel full-time, I came up with a video series called Get Into RC. And that was really focused on helping people understand all the different concepts of the radio control hobby. And since then, things have changed here on the channel. I started doing more projects and reviews, and that video series kind of fell to the wayside. It's time to bring it back. It's time to help people out. That's what I love doing. And one of the things that I see that's kind of a mistake that's happening more frequently is people not understanding the differences between the cars and the classifications that the cars are put into. So back when I started RC, I was immediately introduced to racing classes because I became a racer. And we had the buggy class, so we had the truck class, and we had a production class. And those were to identify the style of car, and those styles of car would run against each other. So you wouldn't run a buggy against a truck on a racetrack. You would run buggies with buggies and trucks would run with trucks. That's how I was introduced into the classifications of the different cars. And another way to look at it is the different categories of cars. So again, you're gonna have buggies, you're gonna have trucks, you're gonna have crawlers, you're gonna have monster trucks, and all these different classifications. And the mistake that I'm seeing people make nowadays is some people are calling a competitor model a copy, which is not the case. It's just another model that falls within the same class or category as what you may have. Another way to look at it that may help you out is, let's take for example a real car like the Chevy Colorado, which is a pickup truck. Well, the competitor of that would obviously be the Ford Ranger. Now, Ford didn't copy the Chevy Colorado, for example. They're just in the same classification, same category as each other. And from there, you would, of course, if you're buying one, want to go and choose which one has the better options for you. So again, if two models look similar to each other and they're from different brands, they're not copies of each other. Now, there are copies out there, and one of them, for example, the Tamiya Bruiser. And there is, I believe, a Chinese company that went and basically back poured the molds and created another Bruiser that looks exactly the same, but for a cheaper price. Now, that would be considered a copy. And I know with Traxxas, they have their TRX4, and there's another overseas brand that has basically created the same exact molds, and they're selling it at a cheaper price. That would be a copy. But for two vehicles that just look similar, that fall into the same class or category, they're most likely not. And another example of a copy would be if I could take the suspension arm off of this truck and put it onto this truck, maybe they're copying each other in that respect. But if you go and really look at these different models, you could see differences between them. Another big one out there is the Sledge and the Creighton. Well, they have a very similar look to them, but if you look closely at them, you'll see that the design differences are very different. They're not a copy of each other. They're just in the same class, in the same category. So next up, I just want to run through some of the main categories that are out there so you can see the different style of vehicles that fall within them. So there are a bunch of different categories out there, and if I were to go through all of them, I'd probably put you guys to sleep. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of categories, and we're going to start off with the trucks that you see here. These are 1/18 scale off-road crawlers, and you could identify them by their size. I have a video on the channel that explains the different scales, so definitely check that out. I'll have a link up above to that if you want to learn more about scale. So these trucks obviously look a little bit different on the outside. We have a Toyota here. We've got a Jeep, a Chevrolet, another Toyota. But once I pull the body off, you're gonna see a similarity between them. Here we go, I've got the body off of these three, and well, flip this one over because the body's screwed down to it. But the thing to remember here is these are 1/18 scale off-road scale crawlers. And because they have to fit in that style of class, they're gonna look very similar. It's really hard to make a major change between them. And what the differences are comes down to the small details. So at first glance, you're gonna see that they all have basically steel ladder frame chassis. Well, this one has an aluminum one, still a twin vertical plate though. This one has a steel chassis on it. And that to some may say, hey, that's a copy, but that's not the case. Again, there's only so many ways you could design these things. So this one has a straight axle setup on it, so does this, and this one actually has a a portal axle setup. This has a portal axle setup. So you're going to see some variance, and actually manufacturers, they have different models that some may have a straight axle setup, some might have the portal axle setup, some might have a 2-speed transmission, some might have a single speed. So that's where the differences come in. They're all going to have small shocks and small tires. Some will use different materials throughout, like the Traxxas here that has bushings inside the driveline, where this truck has ball bearings in it. So again, they are all in the same category. They're not a copy of each other. They're just going to be changes that make them different. Next up, here's an example of 1/10 scale 4-wheel drive stadium trucks. And they actually have 2-wheel drive stadium trucks, and they're going to look very similar to each other. That's because of the style of the body, the size of the tires, the stance, the wheelbase. It's all what defines them as a stadium truck. And they actually have 2-wheel drive racing stadium trucks as well, different power systems, 2S, 3S, but the shape of it is what's going to classify the size of it, and sometimes how you use them. So these are basher style, and as I mentioned before, there are racing style stadium trucks. So there's a lot of different categories out there to choose from. Here's a category where you'll see some people calling out copies. It's the 1/10 scale truck class. And when the bodies are off, you're going to see a lot of similarities between the two. There's only so many ways that you can make a 1/10 scale truck. Now, like for example, you're going to have metal frame rails throughout. You're going to have similar size shocks. Obviously, the tires are going to be the same size because that's what fits it into a category. And when you start to really look at things, you'll notice the difference. So here's the transmission in this G-Made. It's kind of this long tunnel scale style transmission. It has a 2-speed, so the shift servo is here. And if you look next to it, the axial, it's a similar setup. It's just a little bit of a style change between the case. Here's the servo for the 2-speed, or actually this one I think has a dig in it. 2-speed's up front here, but as you can see, they're very similar. And then you get over to this Traxxas and this FMS. This is one I saw recently where somebody said it was a copy. Well, yeah, it's going to look similar because they're portal axle trucks, so they're both got to have portal axles. So only so many ways you can make that. The shocks are going to look similar. They've got metal frame rails between the two, and yes, they've got the batteries down the center. But if you start to look really close, they've got some changes. So this one has the servo mounted on the chassis. This one has it mounted on the axle. This one has an inline motor, where this one has an offset motor. So again, it's a category thing. Things are going to fall into a category. They're going to look very similar. But when it comes down to it, you need to look at these things and decide which of the features is best for you. What setup do you like the best? What parts can you get for the truck to maybe modify it, to make it your own, create a project out of it? And that's what you want to look at when looking at a model category. Which setup you like the best, which features you like the best. And that's how you go and choose a model that's going to work best for you. Here's a 1/10 scale 2-wheel drive electric off-road buggy. This one's mainly for fun. And over here is a 4-wheel drive off-road racing buggy. Next to it is a 8-scale off-road nitro buggy. This is meant for racing as well. All sorts of buggy classes and categories. This truck here is a 1/10 scale Pro 2 short wheelbase truck from Team Associated, and next to it is the 1/10 scale Traxxas Slash, a pretty popular racing truck for spec series racing. Then here we have the Losi Baja. This is a 4-wheel drive off-road truck, gives you really scale handling. Kind of one of the only trucks in its class. I guess you could go and maybe lump the Arma Mojave into it, although the chassis setup is a little bit different, the suspension setup is a little bit different, but again, there's a lot of different categories. So that's a quick breakdown of the different classes and categories and even subcategories when you're considering and talking about different RC models. And I say subcategories because there's 2-wheel drive versions of these cars, 4-wheel drive versions. What's cool about the RC hobby is there's just so many different offerings out there for you to have a model that suits your needs that you're gonna have a lot of fun with. Hope this latest video in the Get Into RC series helped you out. And if you wanna learn more, definitely hit that subscribe button. We'll see you back soon.